Good evening and welcome to the February 26, 2020 meeting of the Wyndham-Raymond School District Board of Directors. We're in the Raymond Broadcast Modular and it is 6 p.m. Mr. Howell?
Kate Bricks.
Here.
Jenny Butler.
Here.
Janie Cummings.
Here.
Marge Gavoni.
Here.
Pete Hensler.
Here.
Anna Keeney.
Here.
Kate Levier.
Here.
Scott McLean.
Here.
Christina Small.
Here.
Will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Howell, are there any adjustments to the agenda?
There are not any adjustments to the agenda tonight.
Great. Okay. It is now time for public input, which is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. Not on the agenda. Okay.
So I will speak on behalf of these parents here. We support.
Okay, you need to go to the, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's all right.
You want to speak? You got to get on TV.
Yeah.
And you have to give your name.
Okay, it's fine. And the reason they need you to do that is so that they can hear you.
Hi, I'm Mandy Ladd. I'm actually a Wyndham resident that goes to Raymond, that I really enjoy going to that school. I'm here on behalf of some of the parents of Raymond that we support the outdoor classrooms being built at Raymond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, are we ready to go on to the, now we'll have a presentation about the Raymond Elementary School outdoor classroom.
And if I can just start and
Sure.
do a quick introduction. I wish everyone was here tonight to listen to my budget presentation, but it sounds like they're all here tonight for the outdoor classroom. You want to stick around a little bit and you want to be entertained and enthralled, hoping to have an audience. But no, I actually want to really applaud this group for coming forward with the interest in putting an outdoor classroom at the Raymond Elementary School. The reason the group needs to come before you is that anytime any sort of changes happen to a campus or to a building, it needs to be approved by the local board. So I know Caitlin here has been working with Bill Hansen and been working with Beth Peavy and with Randy on what it might this look like and what some of those parameters might be. Ultimately, the group needs your permission before anything can be placed on that site. And so their goal tonight is to share a little bit about the project and then hopefully in the future to then garner your vote to then allow this project to happen. So.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for having us here tonight. We really appreciate it. Try to speak into the mic. So we do have a presentation. First, I just wanted to share a little bit about how we got to this point. So a group of us started talking and realized that there were parents, teachers, and of course students who were all interested in having more outdoor time at RES. So I went and met with Ms. Peavy, who said, you know, sure, you can explore it. Let's see what happens. She was excited about it, but you know, go for it. And so we decided to see how to examine the feasibility of the project. So we started with a survey of RES staff and teachers. We also went and looked at outdoor spaces in other public schools around the state. And we also researched the benefits of outdoor classrooms just to make sure what we were thinking would actually help the students. There is, in fact, data that demonstrates that it does. Once we had those inputs in hand, we started to draft a plan and then have already gone back to the RES teachers and presented it and incorporated that back in. So we've already kind of built in a feedback loop that is continuing. So just to start with an RES teacher and staff survey, we sent it out to everybody. There were 16 respondents, and 100% of the respondents said that they would in fact use an outdoor classroom if that space was available. And in fact, 15 of 16 respondents said that they would use the space even in inclement weather if there was a roof. That was the most important thing, a raised floor, and you could see some others. Some others were interested in an extra supply of boots and gear for students. And also they mentioned that the pathway, whatever pathway there was to the outdoor classroom would, of course, play a part in if their decision to go out in inclement weather. Something that kind of opened my eyes because I was like, oh, stick it out in the woods somewhere. The teachers really felt strongly, and understandably so, that it was very close to the school, that it felt away, but that it was in fact close, if there was an issue or their bathroom breaks or whatever. So that was good to keep in mind. A couple of other key findings. We had the teachers rank in order of importance what they wanted. This was eye-opening for me because I envisioned like a bench out in the middle of the woods, and it was clear that a more robust structure would be appreciated. So you can see here the order of importance. And then there was also the opportunity for the teachers and staff to provide feedback on additional components that we might consider. And again, all of those are here. And I'm happy to email this presentation out for you afterwards and have some hard copies as well. Several of the respondents, 6 of the respondents, had used outdoor classrooms at previous schools during their teaching experience, and that was really helpful because they could provide real-world experience feedback. So a lot of the teachers, they liked that they could be outdoors and get messy and be in the natural elements and what that could draw out of the lesson. One thing I heard from several teachers that picnic tables don't work, so that was good to hear as well. And so just things to keep in mind. Oh, the difficult for children with physical disabilities, so to keep that in mind as well as we are looking for the space where we are going to put this. Then again, as I mentioned, I visited 2 schools. Here you can see the image from Bodenham Community School. They've taken the approach where the kindergarten classrooms, I think there were 2, they are out every single Monday unless it's below 10 degrees. That's their district rule. They even, if you can see there, they even have a campfire in the middle of it that the kindergartners use. This is a public school. This is, a public school. So it was fascinating. And this was kind of, they just had some parent volunteers who showed up with chainsaws and they threw it up. The teacher did say that one thing that she would change is, I don't know if you can see it kind of in the far part of the picture, there's a tarp that they pull over in inclement weather. And she said that was kind of unwieldy, and that, if she were to choose anything, she would choose a roof to help, because the kindergartners, they eat lunch out there in the rain, so it would help. And then I visited Woodside Elementary School in Topsom, which is K through 5. Again, these are 2 public schools, and they are very committed to nature-based learning. And in fact, I think the administration had brought on a teacher who had experience in developing and aligning curriculum with outdoor learning. Her focus was on science. She was a 4th grade teacher, I believe. And they have several outdoor classrooms spread throughout the school. Here's one of them. And here you can see a couple of other spaces. That rock one on the bottom, that actually has a weather station at it. And I believe it was the 5th graders had part of their science curriculum is climate. So they were doing a citizen climate project where they would track the weather and enter it into some nationwide database and then see how that is working. So there's some really neat things. What looks like a bridge there is over a vernal pool, so the kids go out and they use the railings as desks, essentially as standing desks, to write their observations, and they collect water samples and they go on from there. So there's really neat things you can do. And also, while the focus was really on some of the science curriculum at this school, the other classes bring their kids out for across the board for the classes. Also, just some benefit. I think we all know this just intrinsically. We all know it is good for the soul, but there is, in fact, data that backs that up. So I just wanted to share that. So it helps not just with academic achievement, but with focus and with self-control and all of that. So that brings us to where we are. We are looking at 2 outdoor classrooms at RES. One of them is this more robust build that the teachers all emphasized they would prioritize. This is the location in between RES and the Frog Pond. If you look kind of as it goes, looks like it's going in a triangle back towards the school. That's where the old path used to be over the Frog Pond. So this area is flat. To get there is ADA compliant. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe no real site work would have to be done there in order to build the structure. And then here's the draft design. It will have an entrance, which I think about. It will be ADA compliant. The idea is that there will be benches along the wall, and the teachers, when we met with them, had a really good point. They want the students to be able to both sit on the benches looking inward to the classroom to focus on a teacher, and to be able to have it structured so they can look outward and be observing the nature around them and doing whatever they're doing. So that was really good feedback. And I would say, Bill, we are working on finalizing this design. Obviously, we'll have an entrance. So we are continuing to work through exactly what that will look like. But again, we will be incorporating that feedback. Perfect. So we will be incorporating that feedback from the teachers. And I will also say we have a Boy Scout, Brogan, who has agreed to do this as part of his Eagle Scout project. So there's really significant buy-in from the community who are excited about this. And I can say also, we've heard from a plethora of parents who are very excited to help with the build itself as well. And most of them know their way around how to build things, and some of them are professional builders, are actual builders. So that is that one. The classroom 2, when we went out and looked at the site, we really liked this rock formation. And here's where we see it being more of a natural classroom. And in feedback from the teachers, what we decided that to have a number of tree stumps that can work as benches, and then have also off to the side some planks that could be placed across these tree stumps in case you needed more seating. So really a flexible space there. And when I was visiting Topsom Woodside School, they said, one of the most exciting things is not just being outdoors, but when the kids pick up the rock and there's ants underneath it or there's bugs underneath it. And it's so that it's that natural exploration, which is why I think, this classroom's just as important as the other one. So our timing, and we're still working through the details on that, but we're hoping the classroom 2, that one that's just the stumps and the benches, can be installed in May, hopefully as soon as the ground is hard enough. And again, we have enough parent volunteers who are willing to go out there and do that. And then the idea is that classroom 1 will be built hopefully in June once school is out. So just some additional considerations that we're thinking of that I'm not sure if that even falls under your purview, but just know that we're thinking about it. Teacher training, making sure, working with Ms. Peavy to make sure that the teachers have whatever tools they need to be able to feel comfortable and use these spaces successfully. What additional materials and supplies do the teachers need? At one of the schools I visited, each teacher was given a go bag, but all those go bags were the same. And each teacher, at least each grade, had different needs. So, the teachers brought up at the meeting the other day, well, maybe it makes sense for each grade level to get together, look at how their curriculum could be aligned with outside, and then put together a materials list. And then anything that's not covered by their typical materials that they would receive, I've kind of said I'm happy to help find funding to do that, because and there's a group of folks who feel so strongly that the kids are actually outside and using these spaces. Also, is there any interest in inviting different organizations or people to help with programming a few times a year? I know there's curriculum restraints, and there's, just the teachers have so much they're doing. Do we bring in, an Audubon to do an there are so many options. And so what would that look like? And just, is there anything else we should be considering? And now I've talked at you for a good 10 minutes. I would be happy to answer any questions or respond to any feedback you might have.
Thank you. I'm excited about the idea. Anything that we can do to get kids outside and excited about being outside, I think is fantastic. I'm curious as to, I know there's a lot of things that are still going to need to be worked out, but how do you envision this in terms of, how much time out of a school day would students be in this classroom, and, what's the rotation? Who gets to use it and how often?
So I'm not sure I'm the best qualified. If you ask me, I'd say all teachers should be outside virtually all the time, but I'm not queen of the world. So I guess it'd probably be mostly up to the teachers.
Well, we'd want the do you want me to go to that?
Yeah.
I'm Beth Peavy, the assistant principal at Raymond Elementary School. So this would really be the teachers having those conversations instead of me just saying how it will be facilitated. But I'm sure they would come up with a schedule and a sign-out system. We need to also make sure we have radios for them to be, for safety reasons. So it would be it's going to be a work in progress. And I think once the outdoor classroom is in place, we're going to find areas that we're going to have to bring back to the table and have conversations about as far as how we facilitate the use.
Yeah, I was just curious, maybe you found out, like, at some of these other schools that you visited, how they do it, because you mentioned that some of the kids they're gonna be eating their lunch outside, so that just begs the question of, like, are they spending half the day out there, are they spending the entire day? I guess, I mean, again, that's a
Well,
lot
I
to
think
be
to
worked out,
start,
but-
they're probably going to start with like one subject area that they're going to go outside, because it's going to take some getting used to and prep time of what materials they need outside, and just building that stamina for students in being outside. And so I think there's going to have to be a lot of conversations amongst the team on how different teachers are using it to build their knowledge base and access. Does that make, there you go.
March?
I guess I'll leave how you decide to use that up to you, and we'll be very glad to hear it once you figure out. It'll be a nice little thing you can come back and tell us. But I have a question on the structure itself. Is there going to be a foundation of some sort under this? I'm looking for like stability or having it last rather than sit on the ground.
Hi, Bill Hanson, Director of Facilities, RSU 14. So we're working with Leek & Haney, our structural engineering firm, for the design and how we're going to set the foundation portion of it. It may end up just being a deck on grade. Okay, but well, again, I don't have those details yet because we're at the very beginning concept.
Okay.
But when we're done, we'll have a fully approved stamped plans that will, the structure will be sufficient to be in a public place and be used by the public.
Great, thank you.
And now there's a question about sizes. We're looking at that right now, the size. We really need to look at more closely, working with educational staff, is really space needs and number of children out there. Because it would be really a mistake to build this too small that they don't have the space for the kids to work. So I don't have the exact answer on that yet, but when we come back for a final board motion, we'll have that worked out. So.
Where is the big honkin' rock?
It's to the, so if you are walking now to the frog pond from like the playground area, the frog pond's on your left. The big rock is essentially if you would go straight a little bit into the woods, except
Oh. Okay.
it's a little more clear than just straight into the woods, but it's
Okay.
right there.
You probably know the answer to this. Does the district carry insurance if a volunteer were to get hurt during the construction of this?
We would, yes, we do carry our own liability insurance. We don't necessarily, though, cover volunteers for all events, so that would be something we'd want to pose to our carrier. The other thing that Bill was going to mention is that we also will need to draw a building permit for this, and it will need to be inspected. And then as part of that permit, to make sure that we're, covering all possible setbacks and other things to neighbors to make sure that this is exactly where it needs to be and it's going to be safe. As one of the things Bill and I were talking about today is this does have a roof over people's heads, which means that there's a structure over people's heads, which means it actually has to be structurally sound because, we're going to hope that some kid also is going to go up there and grab off the roof rafters and swing and do all those other things that we know that they're going to do, and we want to make sure that this doesn't come down around their ears when it's built.
Those are great questions. Again, those of you who were on the board for a while remember the Boy Scout project that started off to be a small covered classroom at the high school that now is our open air pavilion at the high school that we enjoy so much. So I see this as being, this is a continuation of that type of project. So we'll be working with licensed builders to actually to frame it up. The volunteers will be helping, but we will have to have licensed tradesmen actually doing the construction.
Bill, while you're up there, I have a couple of questions. So you did mention that this is very early stages planning. I was just kind of curious if you just mentioned something about the deck resting on the grade, and with what this shows is it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, 16 by 16?
I believe that is 16 by 12 in the current setup, but yes, and I expect it might be a little larger than that because of the fact that that doesn't really give enough space for I'd say kindergarten class of 16 or 18 have space to work around. I
Okay.
mean, kindergarten class is generally 1,000 square feet, and I'm not proposing we make a 1,000 square foot structure for many reasons. However, you know, I think that we need to be mindful about how do we work the stations for kids to be out there, and we haven't had a chance to do that at this point in time.
Okay. Yeah, I think that my concern would be, you know, a 16 by 16 platform, if it's not actually going to sit on any type of a foundation or blocks, it's going to start to rot, depending on any type of wood. It might rot a little faster than we would want it to, which leads me to my next question. Is this primarily a wood structure?
Yes,
Okay.
is planned right now.
Okay. What type of wood would you end up using? Is it going to splinter? Is it going to crack under the elements? Are we going to have to replace the wood after so many years?
Great questions. What we've done before, if you go to the open air pavilion at the high school, everything that we have in that location is wrapped in PVC because we didn't want to have any pressure treated exposed. So we're going to be looking at materials. As you aware, this past summer we built the sandboxes. We built that actually out of cedar because we knew that it would be exposed, so that we wanted to make sure that it was a safe wood. So that'll be incorporated into our design. I'll have a detail on the foundation when we go further with this. I'll be happy to answer. Right now I don't have those answers quite yet.
That's fine.
But
one
we
of the
will be
things-
thinking about those things.
One of the questions and feedback. So this is the type of stuff that I'm actually thinking about from a facilities standpoint. So.
Yeah.
Can I continue?
Sure.
Okay.
Go for it.
This plan right here, it does not include a ramp, but you did mention something about it would be ADA compliant. So if it's on a platform or blocks, I would imagine it needs to have a ramp.
Right, and we may bring grade up to that opening
Okay.
as one way to do that. Again,
Alright.
we'll be looking at that. I've already talked to Stantec about the environmental impact of it. That's why we have a hip roof on that, so the water gets dispersed in 4 locations rather than 2.
Okay.
We'll have to review our wetland surveys to make sure that we're not impacting those areas. So we're going to dot all those I's and cross those T's as we go through the process. Really wanted to have the board's approval to move on to the next step before we went too far down the road.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to keep going if that's
Good,
all right.
great.
You had mentioned that you wanted the ability to have the students be able to turn around and face outside. First of all, I love this idea, but I'm throwing these questions out there. The drawing that you have, the schematic, how far would the overhang be so that if it is misting or raining or something like that, that rain is not slightly coming sideways and the kids' papers are getting completely soaking wet?
That's a great thing to incorporate to the design. Hadn't really thought about that. So
Cool.
yeah.
And then my last thing.
Okay.
All right.
You
Uh,
just bored a small child.
I have that effect on people.
He has mad skills.
I do. So the picture that I saw, it does look like the locations are a little bit a ways away from the main building. Who would be responsible for plowing a path, or how are the kids going to be able to get out there? Are we going to be able to maintain a path?
I will have to bring that up with Mr. Gumble.
Okay.
So
All right. Great job. I really do love the idea. I like the kids being outside and learning. I wanted to pose these questions out there so that you guys are able to think about it, and as we get through the next steps, we have some answers here.
Absolutely.
So,
Mrs. Briggs?
Thanks for coming forward. This is a really exciting project, and I appreciate the staff support and the other parents who've come here this evening. I'm wondering if I can get some details about the funding for this, and who's paying for what, and how this works.
So we were still don't, because we don't have a final design, we don't have a final
Yeah.
cost yet.
Yeah.
But there are some parents who work with companies who they feel comfortable broaching to help pay for materials.
Okay.
I can't promise anything yet because I asked them to hold off until we knew what actually we needed. So I did make Beth the promise that I wouldn't go out to the community asking for a lot of money because that's happening a lot right now. So we will be looking to other places.
Okay. Because we don't have any money in our budget currently for this.
No,
Right.
and we are paying for the engineering work out of our regular professional services account that
Okay.
we carry to support all the work that we
Right,
do in the
right.
district.
Right, okay.
And we would do that on any project like
Of
this
course.
because it's a requirement we have on the project.
Okay, good. Well, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
It's exciting.
Jen?
So what is the coordination with the Scout and how is that going to work?
Absolutely, and I don't know if you guys want to talk about that a little bit, but you have more experience than I do with the coordination. So not to put you on the spot, but do you want to speak about that?
Sure. Who are you?
Brogan Danzig. I'm the scout that's gonna be doing this for my project.
So how's the coordination work? I mean, we've had several meetings about this, so we're coordinating. And talk about it from what your project looks like, from like what the steps are that you as a scout needs to take to do this.
Yeah, so first I need to get the plan, which is this presentation, and then I need some signatures, which is basically just proof of approval from some people here and some people in my troop, and then in June or July, depending on what happens with like rain dates, we'll plan on building it.
And as Bill said, it will work with, there will be a licensed builder on site to help manage the project. And my understanding is that you recruit a bunch of your friends to also come as well. And
Traditionally, what Boy Scouts do is they'll send an email to the whole troop with the dates and the times of the project, and then I know because my brother just did his project not too long ago, and we had more than enough people, so we should have enough hands for it.
And Brogan's brother did the shed that's on RES right now, so they are familiar with not just these projects, but doing it in conjunction with the school in the process. Thank you. Did that help, Ann?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Brogan.
Great work.
Let me just add one thing. I'm Steve Danzig. Obviously, I own him. And I think with, when Caitlin approached us about this, it's a sizable project for a Scout, for an Eagle project. So what I think really the basic piece is going to be working in conjunction, and now, hearing that you're going to have, surveyors and everything else, I think that's going to be fantastic for Brogan to work with all of those additional people, because what's the environmental impact? These are all things like with Declan doing the shed, it was, there used to be a shed there, it was a hard surface, so that was fairly easy. This is a whole, another set of guidelines to go by, so I think it's really going to be a great project, so this is super.
Well, we're grateful for your partnership in this, so thank you.
The shed's still there, right?
As of this afternoon. Anybody else have any board comments? I would like to say that I'm very excited about this.
Thank you.
I think this is going to be terrific. And thank you so much for coming. Thanks all of you for coming and supporting this. This is just great.
Just so we know, what is the process from your standpoint from here? Do you at some point vote to allow us to move forward, or, which I understand does not happen today, but?
No.
So a couple things that we'll need to do is work with the group to get some finalized plans, and once those plans are, then it will come as a motion to the board, and the board will formally approve the project going forward.
Okay, great. So we'll plan on coming back here, present the plans.
Yep, and once the location is fully set and that we're sure that we can legally build there, all those different elements.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Good job. And thanks.
And there goes our audience.
Budgets are exciting too.
Yeah. Thanks again. Great job. Okay, now we're going to talk about Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Sure.
So Rogan needed for the Eagle Scout paperwork to be submitted. For him to be able to go forward, he needed a signature from the board. Declan did the same thing.
Right.
So should we do that now so he can start like getting the paperwork together to get submitted?
I'm not sure. I mean, if it's just a signature that says that he.
Has he got the paper there?
Oh, yeah.
What does it say?
Yeah, what does the paperwork
Yeah.
say?
It's just saying that it's gotten the approval of the board to go to the next step. It doesn't mean, you
Oh,
know.
I'm
So
sorry.
if you guys want to wait until you actually have
I think we have to do
position
that.
on the project, that's probably kind of what I'm thinking.
I
we
think,
should do.
I think that's what you, unless Mr. Howell has a different answer.
I think we'd want to wait just to make sure that
Yeah.
where it's going, what's actually the project's going to be, and we anticipate it's going to be a short timeline.
Okay. If not, we'll do another shed.
Do not stray from this project.
That's right. I have a third one at home that's on her.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
We'll do lots of projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Competitive Energy Services, LLC. So we're going to discuss the solar contract with Competitive Energy Services. Mr. Howell.
Sure, and I realize this has been a topic for the board and it's been a topic for the public for a number of months now. And I think it was actually back in December where we had a representative from Competitive Energy Services who came and met actually here in this room. We had a little PowerPoint trouble that night with an iPad, but came in the room to talk about a solar consortium that was being put together across the state of Maine. And RSU 14 was fortunate enough to be invited to be part of that project because of our pre-existing relationship with Competitive Energy Services. And out of the project that's being proposed, and I've shared this before, we are less than 1% of the total project. In fact, at anything, we're kind of riding on the coattails of a number of other organizations. Throughout this process, Aga Dixon, who represents us in many contract matters at Drummond and Woodsum, has been working and co-representing us with City of Auburn and Auburn Public Schools, as well as Scarborough Public Schools.
And the list has grown.
Oh, has it? And has been working and representing us as those contracts are determined. Just so the public, for those people who may be watching tonight, we are pledging at this point a little over 70% of our electricity usage to this project. And we're excited about the fact that not only will we be receiving energy credits that will reduce our electricity costs long term, but in addition we'll be making some steps as a district to go a little bit more green in our power production. And so AGA has been great in walking us through this process and providing templates. Drummond Woodsum has been great. They've brought in an expert on solar projects to kind of help shepherd us and help make some decisions. And many of you saw there was a spreadsheet on potential energy calculations. Aga and her group are actually the ones who did that to kind of help us with that decision making. It's anticipated when this project is fully up and running that we could be earning back as much as over $70,000 a year in electrical credits. I'd like to be on the conservative side and say that we're going to be in that maybe that $40,000 range, but if we get up to $70,000 to $80,000 in credits, I'd be more than happy. And as we've talked about before, $70,000 or $75,000 in credits is the equivalent to paying a classroom teacher. So it's a significant savings. Some of the other benefits of being part of this consortium is that other groups are responsible for much of the upfront costs These projects will be built across the state of Maine. They'll be off-site, so we will not be responsible for the routine maintenance, the long-term maintenance. We won't have to look at them. And where we have limited campuses here in Raymond as far as space, and limited campus in Wyndham and then at the Manchester School, to not have to have space set aside for this production is another bonus. So Bill has been working on this project. Aga's been working on going ahead and negotiating with the contractors. And Aga, I don't know if you have some things that you want to share.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back here. It's nice to see many familiar faces, a few new faces. So what I thought I would do And I can structure this in any way that would be most helpful to you. But really my goal for the day is to make sure all of your questions that you have about net energy billing are answered, and to walk you through some of the mechanics of this contract, of these contracts, because it's a whole host of complex transactions, so that by the end of the my presentation and before you take the vote, you have a really good sense of what the risks are and what the potential rewards are. So I'm happy to sort of give you my, a little bit of background on the legislation that led us to this arrangement, and then we can dive into how it works. Does that sound good? Sure. All right, so just by way of background, as you probably know, the legislature was very active in the renewable energy arena for statewide last year. And one of the laws that was passed, LD 1711, established net energy billing for commercial and institutional customers of electric utilities like CMP and up north Emera. So if you think about your own electricity bill for your home or your apartment, you get a monthly bill from CMP probably, and on that bill there are really two charges. One is for the supply of electricity that you use, and that is probably the standard offer, which is negotiated by the Maine Public Utilities Commission every year. And then the second part is the charge that CMP charges you for the privilege of transmitting and delivering the electricity to your home. There's no difference with school districts. Your RSU 14 also gets a bill from CMP every month, and the slight difference is that when it comes to the supply of electricity, Maine has now been for about a decade in a competitive market environment. So you can choose the standard offer, but you can also purchase your electricity on the market, and try to find a competitive electricity provider who can beat that standard offer. So that is what school districts do. CES is in large part a broker for school districts, municipalities, other large energy consumers in the state of Maine to assist them in that arena, as well as in many other fuel energy related purchases. So basically the RSU gets two bills, one from CMP for the transmission and delivery of the electricity that the RSU uses, and another for the supply. None of that changes with this arrangement. So what net energy billing did was allow customers like the RSU to enter into what are called power purchase agreements, or in this case, net energy billing credit agreements. Those are synonymous. And under a power purchase agreement, a buyer commits to buying a certain percentage of the output of electricity that is generated by a renewable energy facility. In your case, by and large solar facilities, but there are a couple of hydro projects as well. So if you think about it, if you already have your CMP bill and you already have your competitive electricity supplier bill, and you're always going to have that, what would incentivize you from a financial perspective to also buy electricity from a solar facility or a solar farm someplace off-site? And the reason that makes sense is because of the legislation that went into effect last year, which effectively allows you to convert the purchase that you made into credits that can be applied against your CMP bill. So for every kilowatt hour of electricity that you buy from a renewable energy facility, you get a certain dollar value that you can apply against the RSU's CMP bill as well as its supply electricity bill. And the formula is set in state law. It's a formula that's tied to the standard offer as well as to the negotiated price that the PUC sets for transmission and delivery every year. And so what's called the credit, which is also called the tariff rate, is going to fluctuate from year to year. But the way to think about it at its fundamental level is, you're purchasing electricity from these remotely sited solar farms so that that purchase can translate into a credit onto your CMP bill. Does that make sense? So you're not actually, electrons are fungible. You're not actually getting that electron from that solar farm to come to you. It's all being pumped into the grid, but you get the physical dollar credit as well as the environmental credit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in making this purchase. So that's sort of the basic overview of how the net metering law works. And now we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the mechanics of this deal. And at the outset, I just want to explain that it is quite complicated. The set of contracts that will be before the superintendent, if you authorize him to sign on your behalf, is about this thick, the first batch. The second batch is a little thinner. But there are numerous contracts that would be executed, and within each one of those contracts, the RSU would be committing to buying a fixed percentage of the output of a solar facility or a hydropower facility at the onset. So if you want to understand how to calculate the cost savings, and you do want to as the decision maker, because that'll give you insight into the assumptions and variables that play into this analysis, and thereby give you a sense of what the risks are. Then a good way to think about it is through these 4 steps that are on this paper. So the first step is to figure out what your electricity need is. Now, these are 20-year contracts. They're long-term, firm arrangements, which means that by and large, once you enter into this agreement, with some exception, you're committing for 20 years to be buying a certain percentage of electricity from each of these facilities. So you want to be sure that you're buying the amount that you need and not more. So the first step is really to think through, based on your historical usage, what your future projected electricity need will be and how much that will cost you. Now, that's fairly easy to do for next year. It's very easy to do for next year. Bill has crunched the numbers. Chris has looked at the numbers. I've perused them. That's fine. So I won't take credit for that. But you can imagine as you go farther and farther into the future, it gets a little more difficult to predict what your future electricity need will be and what the cost will be, because your historical usage might not be a reflection of your future use. The cost of delivery and supply are not set by you. They're set by the Public Utilities Commission, and those costs are driven by larger market forces. So those are the 3 main variables that go into predicting what your future usage will be. Once you have and so we always want to be conservative, which is why you'll hear me advise you against buying 100% of your projected electricity needs in the form of these credits, because things can happen in the future. You may need to close a school. You may get heat pumps and have more electricity needs. In the alternative, you may invest in an energy savings project and insulate your walls better, or install LED lighting, or whatever new lighting technology comes forward in the next 20 years. So it's not, you want to be conservative in projecting your future needs so that you don't over-purchase. The second part of the analysis is really to try to figure out how much it's going to cost you to purchase the power under these, the power purchase agreement or the net energy billing credits agreement. And remember what I said, you're buying a percentage of the output of each of these facilities. The design of these many of these facilities is still being developed. Many of them have not been constructed. Most of them have not been constructed yet. And so we don't know, we can't predict at this moment in time exactly what the solar production is going to be for each of these facilities. In addition, solar production varies, as you know. On a cloudy day, we don't have a lot of sun. Solar production will go down. On a sunny year, it might go up. And over time, solar panels degrade slightly. So there's a reduction in production over the years. All of which means that you can't really pinpoint how much your bill every year to the seller is going to be. It's going to fluctuate from month to month. It's going to fluctuate from year to year. One thing to keep in mind is as you think about when the RSU's electricity need is at its highest, it's probably not at the time when solar production in Maine is at its highest, is at its peak. So what do you do in that situation where, you know, you're probably using a lot of electricity in February and probably not so much in August when all of your facilities or most of your facilities are closed. The reason, but you're still going to be paying for that solar production even when you are not using it in any given month. And the reason that works is because the legislature has given you a 12-month rollover. So if you acquire credits to apply against your CMP bill, say in August, that you don't use in August, you can carry those forward for a month, for up to a year. After a year, however, they do expire. So that's why, again, it's important to not over-purchase. So you've figured out what your electricity usage is, what that costs you. You've figured out what the cost to buy the solar power is. And by the way, with respect to the CES arrangement, what CES has done is essentially served as a broker between a whole bunch of buyers, one of which is RSU 14, as the superintendent mentioned, and a whole host of developers of renewable energy facilities. And each one of those developers has provided a proposal to CES to sell their electricity at a given rate. We don't know exactly what that kilowatt hour rate is for each project, and we won't know that until it comes time to sign. But the understanding is that the average blended rate of all of those developers that all of those developers are offering is significantly less than the value of the credit that you will get, and that's how the savings are calculated. So if you look at the third part here in the orange, it describes to you in gory detail that I will not delve into unless you'd like me to, how you calculate your credit value. But the short version is you take, you don't have to calculate it. The Maine Public Utilities Commission sets it every year in January. So we know what the rate is going to be for this year, for 2020. We have no idea what it will be in the future. So again, the variables here is the credits are based on the standard offer as well as the charges that are the delivery rate that is put out to RFP by the PUC every year, and those things vary from year to year. And then once you have those three pieces of information, it's, you know, simple math. You take your credit value, you subtract your cost, and that is your savings. So as I've been walking through this, you'll see that in each section I've highlighted the key variables, the key assumptions. Some things are within your control, like sizing the project correctly, and Bill has been working very closely with CES, who has all of your historical usage data and cost data to calculate how much electricity would be wise for you to purchase. I think 70% is 71%. So you're not even close to that 100% mark. And after that, you know, again, the further you go out in time, the more speculative this arrangement becomes. And so you have to get comfortable with the idea that there's a very good likelihood that you will see savings in the near term. And the ability to predict that 20 years out is, you know, goes down over time. So that's a lot, you know, to absorb in one 5-minute spiel, or however long I've talked. Yes.
Can I ask a question right now while it's fresh in my mind? We've talked about this for a while now, and when we've been talking about it, we've been, as Bill just mentioned, talking about purchasing 71% of the district's estimated consumption needs. You've used a term tonight that I haven't heard yet. You've used it a few times, which is we're committing to purchase a percentage of the output, which is
Yes.
not the same as we want to purchase a percentage of our need, but you're saying we're purchasing a percentage of the output, which we can't control.
Correct. That's
how do we-
exactly right, and that's
how do we
very
reconcile
important
that?
in understanding this arrangement. So after you go through these calculations, you come up with a purchaser's percentage. Yours is like 1%, okay? It may be even less than that. It's significantly less than that. So it's a fraction of a percent. And so, but what you're committing to is purchasing that fraction of a percent of the electricity that is produced by every distributed generation resource, which is these solar farms and hydro projects, that is part of this arrangement. And it's roughly a dozen or so projects.
And so we're hoping that minuscule percentage that we're committing to purchase ends up equaling close to 71% of what we
We're not
need.
just hoping, we've done the math. And we know that that purchaser's percentage this year, based on your historical usage, and I believe they've calculated it back at least 3 years for the district, is roughly 71%, equals to roughly 71% of the historical usage, electricity usage of the RSU. But
Right,
that
but-
number could change, and so I'll give you the horrible hypothetical. Let's say cold fusion is invented. We're all waiting for the day. And our entire, I mean, this is a little absurd, right? But just bear with me here. And our entire, framework for delivery of energy is just completely changed. You will lose on this deal if that happens financially, because this whole framework is set up with a presumption that the market forces will be more or less what they are currently. In other words, electricity will go up and down depending on demand. Electricity prices will go up and down depending on demand. Your projected need will be roughly the same, and you will be buying at a rate that is lower than the tariff rate. And so you'll be getting, for every dollar you spend on solar energy purchases, you'll get, say, $1.75 in a credit that you can apply against your CMP bill. But there are situations where you can envision where, the savings are less than what you imagine. If your historical usage goes down, that would be a good example of of that situation. If you find another source of electricity that is behind the meter, meaning on site, and you're not tied to the grid, that might be another example. What I will say is that while you are legally committing to buying this percentage, regardless of what how your needs in-house change over time, there are some outs. Nobody here is interested in selling you credits that you don't use. That's to nobody's advantage. And so there are ways to come back to the negotiating table through CES to make adjustments to those numbers. But you really, I would advise you that you should look at this as a commitment for 20 years to be buying the output of those facilities, and you are taking on some risk. These contracts are all about risk allocation between the buyer and the seller. And if you think about it from the seller's perspective, these are developers of infrastructure that is very expensive. They're going out to their banks or their lenders or investors to try to, get the money to buy the stuff and build it. That's an upfront investment, and those investors and lenders need predictability that those loans will be paid off. And so the risk is put on the buyer to ensure that payment will be forthcoming, barring anything really unforeseen. So one of the unforeseen things that could happen is that the net metering law could be repealed. It's a statutory framework. You have some protections in here. If net metering goes away, you only pay for what shows up on your CMP bill, number one. And number two, you also have some constitutional protections that we can avoid getting into. But so those are, basically your buffers are sizing the project conservatively, which you have done, and the understanding that you only pay for those credits that appear on your CMP bill. But if they appear and you don't use them, you lose them.
No, but to finish up that thought is that, so we're buying into like 12 projects. We have a pretty solid idea of what the output's gonna be,
Yes.
but you said that can fluctuate each year, but it's gonna be
Or
minor fluctuations.
Minor
if we have
fluctuations, yeah. There's
tons
also
of cloudy days or whatever,
Yeah.
but it's gonna roughly be, it's gonna average out over that 20
Exactly.
years. Okay.
And the other thing to bear in mind is that these developments, these projects are going to come on board at different paces, at different rates. If you think about it, if a solar farm were proposed in your community, it would have to go through planning board review in all likelihood, maybe site plan reviews, local reviews. The developers also have to get interconnectivity approvals from CMP, which is a process, and unless those things fall into place, the project can't be built. So there's basically a 2-year window wherein these projects, are required to be built, and if they're not built by a certain date that is set out in the contract, you're not obligated to. Those credits, first of all, won't show up on your CMP bills, so you won't be paying that developer anything.
I was actually going to ask about the 2 years, because my understanding is our 20-year commitment starts at the end of, if they took 23 months to get that up and running, and then it got online, we would have 20 years from that point, not
That's
from
right.
today.
Mhm.
And the 12, do you happen to know how many of the 12 projects are up and running right now?
I know that only the hydropower projects are up and running, which I believe there are a couple of,
Okay.
too. Yeah.
So at the time that we enacted this, we would be buying whatever tiny fraction of that one project, and then as they get added, we're.
You're increasing
Is
your
that correct?
purchases.
Okay.
Yep, you got it.
At any point, will there be more than 12? Could there be 2,000?
There's a cutoff. So what CES has done was get commitments, as you know. You committed to negotiate in good faith to proceed here. So they've gotten those kinds of commitments from their buyers, their pool of interested buyers, and have calculated out how many megawatt hours of electricity that demand is, what we call the load. And they've matched that up with the developers that submitted offers. And then once, so they went obviously from the lowest bidder to the highest, and they chose the lowest bidders up until the point where the load offered matched the load need of the buyers, and then they drew a line. So now that they've drawn the line, there shouldn't be any
Okay, I guess that's what I was getting at,
additional
is there's not a chance
projects.
that they will add so many more projects that it'll push us past.
No.
Okay.
That's definitely not an option. What they may do, which should not affect your position at all, is switch out projects. For example, if one looks like it's not going to get local approval, they might pull one in to fill that unmet need. But they're not going to keep incrementally adding. So once you sign the batch of contracts, you really know what your maximum out-of-pocket cost will be.
Thank you.
Or you'll be able to calculate that from year to year. You won't know it because of the variables. So it's a complicated arrangement. And, I pulled together a draft vote. Do we have that?
Jenny has it.
Yeah. And you'll see that it's not the type of vote that I typically draft for you. It's much longer. It has whereas clauses. And the reason for that is, we've come to the conclusion that as a legal matter, we've built in a non-appropriation clause into these contracts. And so just like you are allowed to authorize lease purchase financings, for example, buying this modular, you can also enter into this long-term contract without taking it out to the voters for approval, as you would have to do if it were a bond, for example. But, memory fades over time, and it's hard to think back to what you did last year or maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, never mind 20 years ago. So I wanted to develop a bit of a record for you to explain to the future boards of RSU 14 how you arrived at this decision if you choose to go in this direction. And so the whereas clauses are really aimed to do that. And you'll see that in those clauses, there's an explanation that you're not just doing this for the financial benefit, although that's significant and it's calculated conservatively, but you're also doing it for the environmental benefits. And that's something we've not really touched on, but you're also, in addition to buying the credits or buying the power that will, be seen as credits on your CMP bill, you're also buying what are called renewable energy credits, RECs. Have you talked about that? So if you're familiar with sort of broad principles of carbon trading, there are very sophisticated carbon trading markets all over the country, including in California, where basically polluters are required to either reduce their pollution or put mitigation measures onto their factories or whatever they're doing. Or if they cannot do that in an economically feasible way, they can purchase renewable energy credits on the market to offset their pollution. By owning the renewable energy credits, the RSU is basically saying our credits, our environmental footprint is not for sale. We're retiring those credits, or you can choose in the future to sell them, although that process is a little bit complicated. But there's a dollar value attached to those credits. It's roughly $20 per megawatt hour. So there's an additional value there that you can use to either retire and make statements about your environmental stewardship, or sell and offset some of your costs in the future. And you don't have to make that decision today.
Yeah, you've referred to multiple contracts, stacks of contracts.
Yeah.
Do we have a contract for each separate project?
Yes.
Is that why it is?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So every buyer will get a stack of contracts. They're identical except for the details of the facility and, the output of the facility, how much the electricity will cost you, and who the seller is. But the fundamental terms are the same.
So that protects us from them adding additional projects too, because we wouldn't have contracts for those additional
Correct.
projects.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and CES is the broker here managing that delivery of contracts and the signing of the contracts. So they're keeping track to make sure that whatever projects RSU 14 signs on to, you know, everybody will sign on to the same set of projects. Every buyer will. And in total, that will not exceed the load of all the buyers together. Yes.
I don't know if this is a legit question, but is there a list of buyers and we're one of them? Did I hear that L.O. Bean
Yep.
was one of them? I think that might be helpful, some of the bigger names that were smaller fish compared to maybe some of the other folks that are involved in this.
Yeah, I can tell you that, you know, there are a handful of large institutions like colleges and hospitals involved, a handful of schools and municipalities, and then a handful of businesses. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're obviously representing, I'm doing work mostly for the schools, but we're also representing the colleges and LL Bean as well on this
Great.
deal.
Thank you. Marge?
This particular vote here doesn't mention the 20 years. Does the 20 years in the other, when this list of contracts all comes out? Is that
It
where the
is
20
in
years
there. I believe
I
the
didn't-
vote
I don't
does.
think I saw it. Unless I missed it.
I'm sorry, I don't have the vote in front of me. That's it. Okay, so we had provided you the form of contract, which has that been provided to the board?
Yes,
Okay.
this one, is that
Yeah. Yeah, so
Yes.
that will be part of the meeting minutes. That's the form of the contract. It's basically all of the essential terms that I've talked to you about,
I don't have
except
It
for
was
the
in your board
dollar
packet.
value and the identification of the developers.
It's here.
It was in the electronic packet.
Yeah, it was
Oh, the didn't say that.
Sorry.
It was in the electronic packet that went.
Gotcha.
So, and I can walk you through that contract if you would like to hear sort of the key terms.
I'm all set.
Okay.
I'm all set.
But it is a 20-year commitment.
Yes. I actually had a picky question about that contract. I wrote down where it was. Section 12.5 on page 19 under dispute resolution.
Mhm.
I was just, it said we got to choose mediation or not,
Yes.
and it wasn't checked.
You will check the top. I will
I
check that for
I
you.
figured there was a reason that we should check one of them.
Yes.
And you would have the answer.
Yes, and I will instruct Chris accordingly, but basically you will not choose arbitration. But some of the clients, some of the buyers prefer that. It really depends on the nature of your organization. For schools, we generally advise you to not go with arbitration.
Okay. Could I have a
Good
motion?
question, though. I'm glad you looked at the contract.
I don't think so. We don't have to read this whole,
You don't. You just need to read the motion at the top.
I was really hoping you were gonna say
I was gonna nominate
We try
someone
to
else.
keep
to
this
read
as
it.
simple as possible.
I move that the vote entitled "Vote to Authorize the Purchase of Net Energy Billing Credits" be adopted in form presented to this meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment or board discussion? All those in favor? No opposed. The motion carries.
Great.
Just want to, before we move on, I just want to thank Aga and Bill. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done in the background. First of all, making sure that we have our historical load correct and that Bill has gone back multiple years. And actually, Bill in his spreadsheets keeps those anyway because constantly looking at where we are with electricity. And then Aga for also working with some other districts to help spread some of those legal costs.
Yeah, and I'm happy to report, I think we're splitting them 8 ways now, so the fee,
great.
the legal cost for the negotiation should be pretty minimal. And I'll circle back to you on that once we get all of the votes finalized, which should be next week, actually, I think.
Okay,
I think
so
it'll be
the-
done next week.
So we should sign this?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to pass it down, make sure everybody signs it before we leave. Okay, thanks so much.
thank
Audra.
you, my
Thanks for
pleasure.
coming out here, and it's good to see you again.
Jenny, would it be okay to do a 5-minute break while I set up my PowerPoint?
Yes, it would. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Now I'd like to have Mr. Howell do his budget presentation.
It's that time of year again where we start what's going to be quite a process to try to finalize a budget for RSU 14. And so tonight has always been the last Wednesday of February, has always been the traditional kickoff for that process, and has also provided the superintendent an opportunity to talk about where we are budget to date, and then also to share with our greater public what are some of the challenges and other things that we're going to be looking at as we approach this budget. As soon as I finish my presentation tonight, this goes from being my budget to your budget, and then becomes an opportunity for plenty of public comment, as well as plenty of opportunities for the community to weigh in. In addition, the PowerPoint that I'm going to be sharing tonight will be uploaded on the RSU 14 website tomorrow. So if any members of the public want to go through and have that opportunity to take a look. The board will be receiving their budget books tonight. They're over here, all 4,400 lines of them. And I thought actually starting tonight it would be fun. I know some of you have been on the board a long time. You've not been on this long. This is the budget book from 83, 84.
Oh my goodness.
When it was done. The budget at that time was just a little over $5.9 million. It was approaching the $6 million point. And what was fun in kind of reviewing through some of this, and by the way, between 82 and 83, they had a 10% budget increase. But
Just saying.
just saying that it was there. But some of the priorities set within the budget to recognize needed momentum in math and science, to continue improvements in computer literacy, to begin the implementation of an advanced placement program at the high school. And by the way, for the improvements in computer literacy, they were purchasing a computer for the high school. One. Easy spreadsheet to do. There weren't any colors, there weren't anything like that, with a black and white monitor. To continue extracurricular program growth, to continue implementation of the junior high reading program, to implement a summer reading camp, to improve the school health program with an additional school nurse, and to continue modernization of the bus fleet. And there was actually a significant amount increased. And sitting with Stacy Webster, this was actually Stacy's first year in central office, 83, 84, and she remembers typing out this book and working through the budget. So the budget book that the board at that time was working through was much, much smaller than what you're going to work through, and the complexity of our budget has obviously grown over time, and we wish it was that easy. So Christine's going to be my slide helper tonight. We're not sure if I'm supposed to like tap my foot or but if we could go to the next slide. So just a reminder, it feels wrong doing that. So before I get into budget timeline, there's some important people that I do need to thank for this. And first of all, Stacy Webster, who put together all your budget books. We're on version 4, which means that we've already been through a number of iterations with the budget. Also want to thank the folks that work in our business office for helping put some of those things together. Thank Christine and her leadership and working with the administrative team with me and working through our budget, and then our building principals and also our building leadership teams. Budget has obviously started quite a while ago. We were working back late October, beginning of November, holding budget meetings in December. So this has been quite a process to even to get to the point where we feel comfortable turning it over to you folks. So tonight I'll present the budget. Let's just hope we don't get any snow. But on the 4th, 11th, and 18th, we'll have budget presentations. March 25th is a chance for some public comment. Board will have a chance to deliberate. There's also another deliberation built in for April Fool's Day. I'm not sure how to take that. April 15th, looking for the board to make a final decision on where we are in the budget. We're scheduled already for May 20th for the auditorium at Wyndham High School for the public budget meeting. Bill Stockmeyer will be joining us again. That also will be the night on May 20th where we'll have another public budget meeting on the exact same night for the revolving renovation bonds, where we're required to have some public comment for that. And then June 9th is our public budget referendum. And so it is a process. And again, I want to just stress to the community that there's multiple opportunities for people to actually come in and weigh in on the budget. As we think about budgets, you've heard me say this many times before, and Dawn is one of my predecessors, the budget is your ultimate policy document because it shows where you put your priorities as a board and how you spend your money. And so it's important to think of this process, and as you enter into this process, that you're really setting policy through how you spend. The other thing that really kind of helps kind of set our direction and which way we're going is our strategic plan. It's exciting for us right now. We're getting ready to launch a new strategic plan, launch the process to do that. Next Thursday night, March 5th, we'll be holding a community forum. You folks are welcome to attend that. We also have many different people representing many different groups in the community coming to talk about what that next strategic plan is going to look like. So I've included just some elements from our last strategic plan, which is number one, our district mission was to ensure the success for all learners. And we kind of jump over that mission oftentimes and jump right to what are the goals of the strategic plan. But that's important, and it's an aspect that I see in all of our school administrators, that they truly care about all kids and that they want to see all kids succeed. So I think it's important we kind of stop and think about that. And it really ties right into our vision. Every student, not just the kids that are over here, the kids over there, the kids with these skills, the kids with these deficits, every student in our schools actively engage authentic, individualized, personally relevant learning, supported by highly effective, qualified, passionate staff in a safe environment. Student explain why their learning is important. Hugely important. Kids can actually talk about why they're doing that. Competent in articulating their own progress, they reach ambitious individual goals. Students learn in technology-rich environments, no longer defined by traditional boundaries, engaging with the local and global communities. Imagine that back in '83, thinking that every kid on their desktop would have a way to engage with the global environment, whether that be good or bad, but just how far we've come with technology. And then getting into our goals, and I'm not going to read the goals to you, but that first one under Design for Learning, looking at how we deliver instruction. And you as a board are familiar, there's been quite a bit of work done lately through implementation of a math curriculum, which was a 3-year process, even getting us up to that. Working on writing, Christine and Beth and Kyle and the kindergarten teachers and now some of the first grade teachers have been involved with building now integrated units so that we can involve more things like nature and other experiences into our learning. So looking at that overall design, and it's my hope in the next strategic plan that will be that integrated learning. How do we connect all the subject areas together becomes a major, major theme throughout that. The environment for learning. We know it's so important that kids feel comfortable with the environment that they're in, not only from the heating and electricity and whether or not it's cool or warm, but also whether or not they feel like the adults that they're working with accept them, understand them, really care about them. And Christine and others of you have been involved with some of the social emotional work that's been happening across the district this year. Real focus on making sure our students feel connected. And technology. You as a board have been super, super supportive of making sure that technology and appropriate technology is available for kids. So as we went through the budget this year, and as we started this planning process back, our accountability, because we have to be accountable to the community. We understand that there's only a certain amount that the community can afford. But again, it's our role and it's my role to advocate for our students. So what's needed to continue our commitment to that success for all? So how we spend our money, can we still continue to do that? What's in the best interest of our student? What moves us forward with our strategic plan and our goals? And that last one, which I know members of the community, because roughly, what do we have, 60 to 70% of our community does not actually have students in school. What's fiscally responsible? What is it that our communities can actually afford? And the budget I'm going to be presenting to you tonight, you know what? It's really maintaining services, and it's meeting our legal obligations. And as I shared with the board in the workshop, is that this is a little different budget year, and it was interesting even going to 1983 and 84. 83 and 84 was a negotiations year. There's language in there that talks about, you know what, this budget's a little bit up in the air at the moment because we're still in the midst of negotiating contracts. Isn't that funny how you actually meet that? So as we look at, and some of the items that I'm going to share within our budget, we are looking at maintaining those services and meeting those legal obligations. I included a couple pictures there. One is the chamber singers from opening day. The one on the far right is Mary Poppins Jr., which I know the ending to now, how that ends. And that middle one, Frank is the custodian at the central office. Frank is an amazing man, does that office every night, does it with the biggest and sweetest heart possible. This is his little area. That's all of his training certificates. How do we make sure that we're maintaining safe and clean schools, and that we're also holding on to people like Frank, who do that work? Frank's there right now, making sure that my desk is clean, and I make it a challenge for him, but also making sure that our offices are presentable, much like all the custodians across the school. So what you're going to see in this budget is really how do we maintain those services, and how do we continue to meet some of those legal obligations that we have. So much like other budget presentations you've had in the past, this is broken down into 3 components, which would have been some of our challenges. Talking about some good value in the district as far as things that we provide to the community. Because if you look at what we spend per pupil, we're not one of the high spenders. We're not one of the low spenders. We're right there in the middle of the pack. In fact, if you look across districts in the state of Maine, we are 130th in what we spend per pupil out of roughly 240 districts. And the range was kind of interesting going through and doing a little research, is between $32,000 per student to $8,000 per student. Trying to figure out how the $8,000 per student does it, but we're right there in the middle, right around 11.8. So we're going to talk about some challenges here, but also talking about some of the good value they provide, and I'm going to end tonight with the proposed budget for us. So when we started this budget, and the budget I'm bringing to you is not 794, but opening the door, looking at, you know, what do we need to budget for possible contracts, for health insurance, and I included that under negotiations because we're trying to, and it was actually goal 2 of our previous strategic plan, which was attract, hire, retain the most capable staff. And we're trying to do that. We want to be competitive. And so we have 3 members of the board who've been, been wonderful enough to sit through negotiations. They've completed the administrators' negotiations, and we're working through now the teachers. We'll be starting support staff soon, but looking at what is our maximum exposure possibly for health insurance and salaries. Special ed costs. One of the things that you saw as a board last year, one of the things that we're continuing to see are rising special ed costs. And one of the challenges that we're seeing is that with, it's been in the news quite a bit lately, with facilities that are shutting down and services not being available. And so there's groups now that are starting to open group homes and are hiring staff in with students with group homes. And in those particular cases, if a student is in the age group where they're available to go to RSU 14, then RSU 14 then becomes responsible for those costs. This year alone, we've gone from 8 out-of-district placements to 14. Okay? We had 4 in 1 week. I think that was 3 weeks ago. Out-of-district placements run between $60,000 and $120,000 per student. Huge, huge hit to the budget when you're not expecting that. We're also finding that through the CDS system, with the number of students that need to be served and who are not being served, that kids are coming into our system with unmet needs. And it would have been great if they were taken care of when they were in that 3 to 5 range, but they haven't been, and so we've had to increase the number of speech therapists in order to be able to meet the needs of our kids coming in. We do have the good news. We do have some increased enrollments and there is a building boom going on. And so we are starting to see some greater numbers at the younger grades. We've got a large bubble that's gone through, starting now to go through Wyndham Primary School. Best numbers are up at Raymond Elementary School. Wyndham Middle School is the largest it's ever been, and those numbers are now going to be approaching the high school. We also know health insurance. Health insurance 2 years ago came at a 3.9% increase. Last year we were close to 8%. So we have some fluctuations, so we have to build that into the budget. Moving on, if you remember, and for some of you who've been on the board quite a while, Maine Purse was shifted from the state to local districts as part of our, appeared as part of our subsidy. Basically, it was a cost shift at the time, and this year's budget has $904,000 of Maine Purse teacher retirement that the state once paid for. It's 1.7% of our total budget. Was a cost shift that went from Augusta to RSU 14. State valuation increases. This was kind of fun looking through. Statewide last year, the state of Maine increased by 5.6% in total value. Sounds great. We live in Cumberland County. Cumberland County was up 7.5%, which sounds all right. So my housing value's gone up 7.5. Wyndham's gone up 8.4. So, and Raymond's gone up 2.2 because the level of construction that's been happening in Raymond hasn't been happening in Facet and Wyndham. We have a state funding formula that is based upon perceived value of communities. So if the state goes up 5.6%, your largest community within your RSU went up 8.4%. The state perceives you to be more valuable. You'll be able to raise and levy taxes at a higher level at the local level. Your amount of state aid starts to drop. Raymond is a minimum receiver. So regardless of where Raymond would be, at 2.2%, we're still not going to see additional subsidy money that comes through that. So it becomes a challenge. It becomes a challenge that we start to see less than state revenue. I shared with the board also the workshop night that $40,000 is a 3-year target for the state of Maine to increase minimum teacher salaries. This year the goal I think is to get everybody to $35,000. Next year is at $37,500. The following year is going to be at $40,000. For RSU 14, we have 2 people right now that make less than $40,000. If I work in Lubec, Maine, I may have my entire staff, as far as new staff, 0 to 8 years that aren't at $40,000. So additional funds have been shifted to bring those numbers up, and there were some master spreadsheets created across the state of Maine to help people get to that point. So additional subsidy went to those. Another challenge, and it's going to have to be a significant conversation for the board in this budget, is that we received $678,000 in additional subsidy this year. $235,000 of that was with the supposition we might have a pre-K program. If we don't have a pre-K program, of that 678, 235 goes back to the state of Maine, and we don't see that. So we're going to have some challenging discussions about whether or not, and it was 647, has some challenging discussions of does that money go back. So for a $300,000 program, $235,000 is in subsidy, so it costs you $65,000, but can we afford it with all the other things that are going on? Pre-K is currently not in the budget. So just clear, pre-K is not in the budget at the moment. And the budget you're going to be looking at tonight and the budget you're going to get in your books, you're looking at most of the expense side of the budget, not necessarily looking at the revenue yet. We'll bring those two together. So this historical graph, it's a great piece of data. We've been in RSU now for a little over 10 years. It's going to be, our 11th budget. And out of that time period, our subsidies only increased $1 million from the state of Maine. Whereas our budget has gone up. I think when we consolidated, we were around $37 million was our overall budget. We're going to be close to $50 million. So of that increase, the state has only contributed an additional $1 million in subsidy over that time period. And part of that, and part of what's driving it, is that we have 2 communities that are perceived as wealthy as compared to what's going on in this. You are doing a great job. Master job with the clicking. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, because you know what? There's some really cool things that are going on in RSU 14 right now. And there are some individuals who are making a huge, huge difference for the programming that happens for our kids. And I want you to also think about, the exciting opportunity that Aga was here talking about, the revolving renovation money, the work that's being done now to support kids in math and reading, and the special education supports and programs. All of that is all being done at 130th in what we spend in per pupil spending across the state of Maine. We've got some people working to bring some great value. So some of the pictures I've shared, the upper left one, that's Paul Field. Paul and a couple of the kids from the Katahdin program, they didn't want to be named, but when they first moved into that program, moved into that site, they didn't really have places to eat outside. The picnic tables had belonged to adult ed, they were falling apart. They took on the project of doing that. That middle picture, it's our unified basketball kids. This was right before Nate had a buzzer-beating three-pointer. I wish to say it was like to win the game. I think they were already up by 10. But one of the best programs that you've supported as an RSU 14 board. That's a parent volunteer in the upper right. And I keep wanting to call her Angela Levine because that was her name when she was my student. Out, and it was -3 that day, launching rockets that the kids had built as part of a writing unit, studying Earth and space science. That lower left-hand picture, that's Frank Locker. That's our middle school visioning. We've got a new middle school coming. That's exciting, through state funds. And we've heard some possible positive news that things look good on the horizon from the state of Maine this week. So some great things. That middle picture, that was the RES Jordan Small holiday concert. Amazing, amazing turnout. In an amazing facility with kids doing some great things in that Jordan Small. And that lower right, that was the dedication day for the new field. Great value. The amount of volunteer hours and other things that went into making that happen, and the support of the community providing that. So it gives you an idea of around the people around us and how we spend per pupil. SAD 51 spends the greatest in our area at a little over $15,000 per pupil, and then you can see down through our rate, our state average is $12,100, and RSU 14, we're right there around where Gorham's at. So just gives you an idea of that per pupil. Looking at system administration, because that's one thing that people always look at. Well, what are the costs of the administrators in the district? Must be a huge cost for us. Gives you an idea that state average of percentage of budget is around 3.2%, RSU 14's 2.9. Scarborough down there at 2.2 is actually not a fair figure because Scarborough combines some of their administrative thing, athletic director, with the Parks and Recreation. Not included as part because it's considered to be a department of the town. So there's same thing with finance, same thing with technology. They're shared, so they don't actually appear as apples to apples with that. Graduation rates, something that was near and dear to my heart. Listing of schools in the state of Maine with over 3,000 students, school districts I should say, over 3,000 students. Got to remember, we are a large district. In the state of Maine, we are a large district, and you run a large Class A high school. So that was the 2018, which is the most recent data published on Maine Department of Education. Only Massabesic High School with a point, and I think they actually have fewer credit requirements. But just seeing down through there, the span between 87.8, and this is a 4-year graduation cohort. It doesn't actually take in the 5-year and the 6-year, and it doesn't include, which is something that as a board you have provided great support for, kids that complete a high school diploma through adult education. They're not included in those numbers. Go ahead, Christine. I want to talk about efficiencies, because this is where, when we talk about through budget time, where can we actually save some money by supporting and working with others. Greater Sebago Education Alliance, you've been supportive as a board. It costs us the grand total of $2,500 to belong to the Greater Sebago Education Alliance. Not bad for, we receive $121,700 in aid from the state of Maine for belonging to that organization. It's a great return on investment. So we've been working through RSU 14, through Greater Sebago Alliance, professional development. There's a leadership academy that's been going on. We're in year 1 of 3. It was a $600,000 grant awarded to Greater Sebago Alliance that we're benefiting from. Those mandatory Department of Education trainings, bloodborne pathogens, sexual harassment. We've now this year, if we have new employees come on, SAD 15 is doing them 1 month, SAD 6 is doing another, Brunswick's doing another month, so we don't have to duplicate. We can send people to those. And then something that's been great this year that Christine Hessler's been helping to head up with Greater Sebago Alliance, workshop days for role-alike employees. If I am at Raymond Elementary School and I'm the one art teacher, it's great to be able to get together with all the other elementary art teachers from across the Greater Sebago Alliance. There's about 40,000 students that are represented within that alliance. Some of the biggest schools in the state of Maine are represented there. And I wanted to put this up there, the last job fair that we had over at Westbrook, we got 20 new substitute applicants out of that, which was pretty cool for 2 hours of our time. Christine went over and did interviews. I did a quick introduction. It didn't really take a lot for us, but we got 20 new substitutes, and pretty exciting that we can actually include that, especially when we are struggling. Energy efficiencies. Blown away by what Bill has done for us through some of these efficiencies. I want to make sure I get the numbers right. So the off-site solar project, which you voted on tonight, we have a potential annual savings, $78,000 when fully implemented in 2023. The boilers, those are the high school boilers that you voted on and talked about all last spring. So far to date, and this is actually taking into consideration even what a warm winter that it's been, we've already saved about $14,000 in heating fuel in just a amount of time. I went over February vacation to take that picture, and it was one of the cooler days, and none of the boilers were running. The building was warm, and I think it was actually one of the coldest days that we had. I think it was running at like 30%, whereas those used to be off, on. And instead they're able to graduate. The Jordan small boiler, 300 gallons a month is what we're saving in fuel oil so far. Just this little bit this spring, and through the work that's been done, propane's been added to not only Jordan Small, but also underground tanks at Wyndham Primary School that allow us now to actively and competitively bid what heating sources that we're going to use. The lights, the classroom lights, this past fall, and I think it was September to December, we had almost $16,000 in savings in electricity on the Wyndham High School campus alone. Efficiency Maine has now started a new program where they're offering up to $100,000 in rebates for schools to get rid of the fluorescent lights, and so money to actually then support that. And of course, Bill already had that taken care of and already had things in the works. So if we hadn't put enough on his plate already. So I think it's important for the community to know that these projects, call it the low-hanging fruit, but any money that we don't have to put up a chimney can go into a classroom. And any money that we don't have to spend in electricity is either money that can sit in a capital plan and improve something else within a building, or it's money that we can use to support a special education student or transportation.
Hang on.
And I just lost my PowerPoint.
His computer's
Oh, it is? So while that's going, talk about some community partnerships, because I think this is also important to talk about with efficiencies. So I know you got a little tiny picture that's there. I'll start with the upper right one. That's my one shameless plug. Staples called in August and said, can you come pick up some boxes? And they filled up the back of my truck, and they filled up the back seat of my truck with boxes of pens, pencils, markers, paper, notebooks to be distributed across all the schools in the RSU. Kind-heartedness of the community. Let me log back in.
That's what happened when the solar
older
Yeah.
gentleman
Yes.
was here too.
We remember.
Down in the lower right-hand corner, the Cooking Club fundraiser, in which the community came out to help support some work that Jeannie and Ryan were doing to support cooking at Jordan's Mall Middle School. The picture in the lower left, the pumpkins, that was Wyndham Primary School's Fall Festival Day. Pineland Farms donated 450 pumpkins for all of our littles over at Wyndham Primary to take home and to have some fun with. The generosity in that upper left-hand corner, we have a group of retirees and others who come, what is that, Marge, Tuesday mornings?
Yes.
And
Couldn't see the picture.
and
Tuesday mornings.
who then go and they pack food packages for kids to take home. Great, great piece. And then the centerpiece, which is the school bus arms. I think right now they've raised enough to handle half the fleet, which is an amazing thing for them to do. In fact, we're at a point right now where we've got, I think we ordered 4, I think Mike told me we ordered 4 yesterday, and there's enough money for an additional 3 or 4 that just came in within the last couple days. And so we will have over half the fleet outfitted by the time the school year is done. And just thanking people for the generosity. And these are some of the bigger items. We also know there's all sorts of smaller items that are out there, and I know that Beth, you sent out a thank you, and Randy sent out a thank you, that there was a giant pallet of Clorox wipes that have had Amazon boxes on them. Probably can't get them right now. That had been sent by the community for classrooms. And we know that there's generosity, and we also know that that generosity goes far beyond within the budget. But I think we need to just include it because through Greater Sebago Alliance, through the efficiencies, through these community partnerships, there's a lot that happens that's outside the budget, that people in our communities are looking to support our kids. And we're thankful. And it was great to see the group tonight wanting to build, donate an outdoor classroom. What a great way for our kids to learn, and what a great opportunity for the RSU to be able to build something that normally we wouldn't budget for. So let's get into the budget. And there's Jeannie and some chefs. They were filming, I think, for Channel 13, and they were making carrot soup. And I'm trying to remember the Indian spice, curried carrot soup. That actually, and some of the carrots came out of Manchester's garden and Jordan's Mall's garden in order to be able to make that. So getting into our budget, let's start with enrollment. So you can see 2019, 2010, we're right now about 3,197 students. We're projected to be another 18. Last year when we did this projection, I was off by about 50. So we've picked up an additional 50 students, so that actually puts us up closer to an additional 65 over the previous year. Numbers are up, and numbers are up specifically right now. Wyndham Primary School's kindergarten class and Raymond Elementary's kindergarten class both came in very, very large. 3rd grade at Raymond Elementary School, and it's great to see RES growing again. We were getting down with numbers around 210, 215. And those numbers are going. Wyndham Primary School numbers, you're all familiar with the middle level. Wyndham Middle School there at 657 students. Next year they'll be at 653. The following year, because there's a smaller group at Manchester, Wyndham Middle School actually starts to drop off quite a bit, and we'll be back into the 500s. And so we know that bubble is hitting towards high school. It's a good problem to have, because remember, kids mean subsidy. Even if we don't get full subsidy for them, we get a percentage. But kids mean subsidy. It's a good problem to have when our numbers are going up. But what it does mean is that we are going to need to have a couple of classroom teachers. So before everyone gasps, I want to remind the board and remind the public that this is a starting point. This will not be the budget, and this will not be the percentage that we're going to land in and land on when you vote in April. It's going to be a process. Remind everyone that there's money that's in there for health insurance, for negotiations. We also have funds in there to make sure that we're meeting our special education needs. And as we start to kind of whittle in, and we know this budget is going to drop, part of the reason why you have to start a little bit high is that it's easier to take money away out of a budget than it is to go ahead and add. But remember that this does not include pre-K in there. So at that 6.81%. Again, this is version 4. Last year when you finished the budget, you finished at version 10. And that was the version that eventually made it to the public. Last year we started at 5.45, and it was not a negotiation year. Okay, so it's a starting point. And again, I just remind the public that this is a starting point for the budget. This is not the spot that we're going to end. So some things from that we're going to be looking at in the budget. And by the way, that's Sarah Hare. I can't even read my own writing. Sarah Hare. She is our first state champion female. Matt Butler was, I think, our first male champion. But in girls giant slalom.
Yes.
So she won over vacation. So pretty exciting. So I thought she gets the opportunity to be in the budget presentation. But some first of all, we right now, Bill and Mike Duffy, and also Lynette Haynes helping out with that, and then some members of the Wyndham Police Department are working on a grant for a middle level resource officer. The district's cost, if we get the grant, is $17,000 out of that. And in conversations with the police department, I want to see that to be a resource officer that's shared between Wyndham Middle School and Jordan Small as well. Okay? Yes?
Is that cost going to be shared between the town and us?
That is going to be our officer. So they will be with us year round if we're paying the full cost.
Are we getting them from would they be coming from the police or say somebody?
We would have to work with the...
Or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We haven't gotten the grant yet either. However, we have to put a placeholder in for the dollar amount.
Gotcha.
But again, the current, what's the word I'm looking for? The current agreement that occurs between the Sheriff's Department, State Police, police officers are deputized in the county. They can work in multiple places. I think there needs to be a presence at Jordan Small as well as Wyndham Middle School. So that's one thing. So that grant is currently going on, but the $17,000 cost has to be included in there. Primary school, a grade 1 teacher. Raymond Elementary School, a grade 3 teacher, and a 10th of a guidance counselor to provide some additional time. At Manchester School, a 10th of a music teacher, and that's to make sure that we can actually offer chorus, which has been a difficult thing to do as a stipended position versus a position where it's built into the person's schedule. And within special education, out-of-district tuition, and 1.5 ed techs, and something that I left out of here, which I will make sure is in the corrected one, is a speech therapist as well within that. If you just go back for 1 second. So as we get through, or as we work through budget presentations, you'll be learning more from each of these cost centers for these individual items. Lisa will be presenting on March 11th. Because special ed tends to be the more complicated. She's working now currently with all of her building coordinators to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the students with IEPs across our district. And that is a Herculean task in order to make sure that everyone's covered. Within the speech therapist, and I apologize for forgetting it up there, our caseloads are high. Our caseloads are very, very high, and the number of kids who are coming in who need speech services, and honestly I think much of that is due to the breakdown in what CDS has been able to offer, that kids aren't getting those services prior to coming into the RSU. Go ahead, Christine. So if you look at our budgets comparatively, here's our first year consolidation at 38.4. And we dropped 1.09%. Last year's budget, which was a significant special ed cost within that, was 5.4%. Overall, we've been a little over 2% while we've been in RSU, if you average all those things together. And again, I will remind everybody that 6.81% is not where we will finally land when this budget's done. We've talked about this before, so I'm going to go ahead and just move right over that, where our subsidy. So I thought this might be helpful for the board as far as it's our budget. How will the budget be allocated? Anything that's in blue, the percentage remained the same over last year within this budget. So all other expenditures, which is any additional grant funds and things that we get in. CTE instruction is at 0%. The reason why is because now through the APS model, money goes directly to those CTE centers. Other instruction, that stayed about the same, and a lot of that is your some outside supports for classrooms. Things that are in red, are things that are increased in this budget as a percentage as compared to last year. So regular instruction, special education cost percentage, and then student staff support percentage has gone up. Things that have dropped, debt service and other commitments. Part of that drop is that Raymond Elementary School, that debt will be off the books. Last payment's made in May. So we will no longer have that debt. Facilities maintenance as a percentage has dropped. Transportation and buses, school admin, and system admin have all dropped as a percentage of the budget. But regular education costs, special education costs, and then student and staff supports. So if you look at revenues, again, with the same color scheme, carryover percentages dropped, tuition as a percentage dropped, state subsidy as a percentage has dropped, local debt and local EPS actually has dropped. Local additional is what's gone up. And so if you think about it, if you get less subsidy, then you end up paying more. The reason why the local EPS contribution adjustment dropped is that the state dropped the required mill rate. It used to be, what was 8.28 mills, and it dropped this year to 8.1. So that local EPS, which again just means that local additional is actually going to pick it up. So as far as looking at revenues and looking at how those attach to expenses as we get further in the budget process, we will definitely be spending more time with that. So the last picture, I had to give Christine a little nod in there with a picture. Our mission success for all. I love the little kid there in the gray in the background. He can't wait to share his idea. And so part of this budget, I'll go back to, this is your greatest policy document. How you will spend and how you will allocate funds throughout this process ultimately dictates what do you value as a board. And you've been a great board as far as making sure the needs of our kids are met. I want to make sure that that kid who's sitting on, he looks like he's on 78 or 68 as a number, that he has everything that he needs. He's a little first grader. He has everything that he needs for his time in RSU 14, so that when he eventually graduates from Wyndham High School, he has some choice. He gets to decide what's next. So from this point on, you're going to be getting your budget books. We're going to be spending time with all 4,400 lines. We can hand them out at the end, go through the other business, and we'll have some opportunities starting next week on March 4th with some of the first cost centers from the budget. So at this point, I turn it over to all of you.
Thank you. I guess what's some of the thinking behind cutting out pre-K? I get it that there's a cost, but just with the slide that we saw with the $235,000, with the way the state is headed, I guess what?
The items that, actually, Christine, if you want to go back to those personnel items. No, you went too far. So take it from, Kate, I guess the best way to approach it is this. So those items that are up there, those are items, other than we could probably get away without having the resource officer grant. Other than that, though, those are items that we need in order to maintain services. That's all that you're seeing in the budget at the moment. I would love to see a pre-K program, and what would actually be required for an investment and what would then be supported by the state of Maine. It makes it advantageous, but at 6.8%, with just being able to support the things that we need in order to run school, I think we can have that conversation if health insurance comes in at a better point, depending upon where negotiations and other things land. I think it would be a a great thing to have as an RSU, but currently, this is a budget that just maintains services.
Thank you.
Just not to belay the point, but out of curiosity, did you get the rest of the numbers? Because when we had talked about the pre-K to see, what the transportation, blah, 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 there was a whole thing. Do we have that in case we decide we want to look at? Okay, great, thank you.
We have the numbers.
And some of it could change with the governor's supplemental budget too, because she just presented today adding a lot more money for pre-K startups.
Yeah, I think I think if you go back to our budget filters, it's, I'll go to that last one. What do we think that can our communities afford at the moment?
Yeah. No, and I understand that. It's near and dear to my heart.
Yep.
So.
And I will not be shy I'll also not be shy that as administrators, as we talked, we're also very, very aware of the fact that withdrawal is on the horizon. And that this budget may have an impact on whether or not withdrawal goes one way or the other. And we're very cognizant of that. We're cognizant in any budget of how it impacts the community. But we want to make sure that we can bring in a budget and that's going to be fiscally responsible for everybody. So, but we have all the numbers for those other things. And again, this is really a snapshot of these are the things that we need so that we can have reasonable class sizes and that we can maintain the services that we need in order to meet the needs of kids. And we have grown. We have grown as a district with those numbers. So, and Christine's got some updated things that we'll share as well.
Thank you. Okay, policies. Can I have some motions, please?
I move to approve the second revised reading of policy IKE, promotion, retention, and acceleration of students.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I move to approve the second reading of policy KH, public gifts/donations to the school.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries.
I move to approve the second reading of policy JLCD, administrating, I can never get that right. Say it.
Administering.
Thank you. Medication to students.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor? Okay, motion carries.
Let's see if I can do it this time. I move to delete policy JLCD, I can't. Administering. Okay, medication to students dated December 16th, 2009.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion?
I do have a comment.
Yes.
This motion and the next one, let me back up. As you recall, the policies regarding medications and marijuana are new. And these two that we're deleting are on the books. So we're getting rid of the old ones since we combined them into one. So that's why it'll be clear.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
Where am I?
Five.
Number 5. I move to delete policy JLCDA, medical marijuana in the schools, dated August 17th, 2016.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Could we have the superintendent's report, please?
Sure. I thought it would be important tonight to kind of share with the public some steps we've already taken. I'm sure most of you have been mindful of the news, where there's been great discussion, not only of the flu, but the coronavirus and things that have been happening worldwide. And there was a comment that I watched last night on the national news, which was basically schools, hospitals, and other public institutions, if you have not done so already, make sure that you're starting to do some preparation work. And so today we did have the opportunity just to review our pandemic policy, which we did have within our crisis plan. There's a few little things that we want to tweak and update within it, but it is still relevant. And at the time that that policy, or not policy, at the time that that was written, it was when actually we were all going through swine flu. And it was kind of funny today, Kelly DeVoe, who's now Director of Communications for Maine Department of Education, she's sending out a communication. I think it's going out tomorrow, but she sent it to me, just said, hey, can you do a quick read over? We had a great reminiscing of the swine flu, where she was going to take a group of kids when she was acting principal of Wyndham High School to New York City, and that trip was canceled because of what was going on at the time. We've also had our technology department. Right now they're currently working through Google Classroom, so that in the event that we could not have kids in school, that Google Classroom is ready to go and that everyone has their access points. We do have the availability of one-to-one computing across the district, that we could use Google Classroom to go out to our students to continue on school, if that was the case. In addition, members of our tech department are working for the younger levels to work on a mail merge email that could go to parents that would have kids' Google Classroom logins, so that they would be able to get their way in through parent help. So doing some of those preparation points. Just want to remind the public that currently there is no one in the state of Maine who has actually contracted the disease. But I think it's just prudent as an RSU that we make sure that all of our infrastructure pieces are in place and that we're doing some planning. And that if something were to happen and we were to receive the direction from the Maine CDC to not open school for a while, that we have everything in place that we need in order to make sure that instruction continues on. And it's obviously not going to be the same level or same quality of instruction, but it would allow us to continue on with something for our families and for our kids. And I hope that we don't actually have to head in that direction, but again, I want to make sure that we're prepared should that happen. So there'll be some guidance going out tomorrow from Maine Department of Education. Basically, it's just common things. If you've traveled to certain areas and you're showing certain symptoms, then you need to go see your doctor. Also remind everybody, and I think this was the other debate last night, that I think they said 20,000 people across either the U.S. or the world have died of the regular flu this year. So it's always good reminder to do good hand washing and other things. We did have some concerns prior to vacation with a high percentage of kids come out. Those numbers seem to have rebounded a little bit. It was good to get everybody out of the buildings for a little bit and get some fresh air. And so rebound on some of those other things. But again, just wanted the public to be aware of the fact that we are planning. We've got some good things in place. And the other compromise or other factor that might be is that many of our schools, or at least Wyndham High School, and I think Jordan Small as well, are evacuation centers or are community resource centers should events happen. And so we would work with local public safety officials in that case for things to happen. So that's what I have for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Board roundtable. Does anybody have anything round to share? Pete?
I will share that last night there was a group of Dare to Adventure students that made their way to the Wyndham Town Council meeting, and just proud of them for getting involved and having a voice, speaking out on issues that are important to them. So they did a good job. Mr. Rossetti was there representing the school district as well, and Be the Influence. So, there's some hot topics going on right now, and whatever side you fall on, it's just good to see our students being involved.
As Mr. Howell mentioned, Sarah Hare was the giant slalom state champ. She also finished in the top 10, I think it was 8th for slalom. And so she was awarded a nice medal for that. And as he mentioned, she is the first female of the Alpine discipline for young women to be able to do that at Wyndham High School. There have been 2 young men in the past. They were both class of 2010. The first was, as he mentioned, yes, Matt Butler, yes, my son, but also Joe Parent in slalom 2 years after, so it's really nice to see this going well. The SMAAs are this Friday at Shawnee Peak. They had been postponed from 3 weeks ago because of a snowstorm, always ironic that way. But anyway, so yeah, ski season is still wonderful. They've been doing a great job.
That's great.
Great.
Anybody else? Okay. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor? We are adjourned.
As Chris was talking.